In one RME class at school, I was given a graph representing the 9 months of pregnancy, on which I was to mark the point that I thought the fetus became a person, and therefore shouldn't be aborted. The teacher, coming around to collect our work, stopped when he noticed that I hadn't written anything.
Shanalika, why have you not answered this question?
I don't think I understand the task, Mr. Duncan.
Right, well, you've got a graph here. This is 0 weeks, this is 32 weeks, and you mark the spot where you think that the fetus becomes a person and shouldn't be aborted. See, here it's got a heart, here it's got wee legs.
No, it's not that I don't understand what I'm supposed to do, it's that I don't see what the point is. Killing the fetus is still killing it. Why try and justify that by saying it isn't a person?
So you think that the fetus is a person right the way through. Right, well in that case you're against abortion and you plot the mark right at the start.
No, I'm not against abortion. I just think that killing is killing. Call it what it is.
But, Shanalika, if the fetus is a person, then killing it would be...
I don't think that the fetus is a person or not. It's more that I don't see the point in making that arbitrary distinction. The fetus is a fetus. It's a cluster of cells that will grow into a baby person. It is whatever it is at any stage, and whatever you want to call it, killing it is still killing it. And I think that's fine. The life of the fetus should come second to the impact it's going to have on the life of its parent. I actually don't think this question is relevant.
Shanalika, can you please just answer the question so I can collect your work?
And that was the day that I learned that deviation from popular schools of thought is not encouraged, particularly in young assumed women, on topics that are relevant to them. Furthermore, Mr. Duncan was looking at me like I might try and slit his throat with a ruler, so I figured this was one of those opinions I'd maybe best keep to myself. There was no need to go around announcing it, after all, abortion is legal where I live. However, recently abortion rights have been on rapid reverse in the United States, and the discussion surrounding it brought me to this video by Sophie Lewis, which was apparently very controversial. Major dogpiling. She was getting compared to Hitler on Twitter and was being touted on various pro-life sites as the devil incarnate. So, I was intrigued to see what the fuss was all about.
We're facing a really terrifying attack on abortion in the US where I live, in Northern Ireland and elsewhere. We're not winning, we're losing spectacularly. We tend to say that abortion is indeed very bad, or we say, luckily it's not killing. We have very little to lose at the moment when it comes to abortion, and I'm interested in winning radically. And I wonder if we could think about defending abortion as a right to stop doing gestational work. Abortion is, in my opinion, a form of killing. It is a form of killing that we need to be able to defend. I am not interested in where a human life starts to exist. Looking at the biology of this kind of hemicorial placentation helps me think about the violence that innocently a fetus meets out vis-a-vis a gestator. And that violence is an unacceptable violence for someone who doesn't want to do gestational work. The violence that gestator meets out to essentially go on strike or exit that workplace is an acceptable violence.
Her views and the way that she was being aggressively shut down echoed my experience from school, so I decided to do a video in support, providing my own arguments along closely similar lines. However, I was beaten to it by the most qualified voice on the subject of AFAB bodily autonomy, Philosophy Tube.
Tonight, I want to give you a completely new way of thinking about one of the most incendiary issues of our time. In 1971, the philosopher Judith Jarvis Thompson wrote one of the most famous philosophy papers ever. As the journalist Laurie Penny puts it, it does not matter whether fetuses are persons. It matters whether pregnant people are.
Ollie, this entire video is literally you reenacting arguments that people with uteruses have already made. Can you not say you're saying something new when you're very demonstrably not? To be clear, other than that one point of irritation, I love this video. I mean, I get to watch Ben Shapiro being tortured by his own logic in a sex dungeon. However, I was very struck by the difference in response between Philosophy Tube's video and Sophie Lewis's. I want to know where his swarms of haters are. Are they here? Here? Hello? Ollie Thorn's done a radical video on abortion. Someone come get him. I want to eat this popcorn. Philosophy Tube's radical argument might not be new, but people calmly listening to and accepting it definitely is. Sophie Lewis's video came out less than a month prior to his, but the difference in response is quite significant. Why is that, I wonder? And what does it say about the abortion discussion as a whole? Sophie Lewis and Oliver Thorn make the same basic argument, that nobody should be forced to undergo suffering in order to save someone else's life. And this is an idea already very commonly accepted worldwide by law. Duty to rescue is a legal concept in which the individual is obligated to help someone in danger. Now, the obvious reason you wouldn't help someone in danger is if there's a significant risk to yourself. Let's say, for example, someone was drowning in a river. You might not know how deep the river is, you might not know whether there are strong currents, you might not be able to swim, all of which would present a significant risk to you if you attempted rescue. That's just one example. There are a myriad of situations in which you could provide a perfectly decent explanation for not saving someone's life. And probably for this reason, duty to rescue is only law in a handful of countries and 10 states in the US. Even then, it typically doesn't require you to put yourself at risk. Usually you just have to call the emergency services. Pregnancy seems to be the sole example where large groups of people think you should have to undergo pain and suffering in order to save someone else's life. The main obvious difference is that pregnancy may have been intentional, in which case you are responsible for that being in that situation in the first place. So let's expand the river scenario. Let's say it was your idea to go swimming. So you are responsible for your companion being in the river. However, you then notice that there are strong currents and you're a weak swimmer. You change your mind and your companion starts to drown. Should you still be legally obligated to go in and attempt to save them, even at significant risk to yourself? Maybe you think you should, maybe you think you shouldn't. But it's interesting that lobbyists for anti-abortion regulations aren't also putting the same amount of energy into getting duty to rescue made law. Such laws would, of course, affect everyone, regardless of their gender. Just quickly before I move on, this argument is obviously made on the basis that the fetus is as much of a person as an adult human, which I obviously don't think it is. My own personal views remain very much the same as they were in school. Fetus is fetus, less person towards the start, more person towards the end, but not at any stage comparable to an adult human. I mean, honestly, I don't even think that a baby is as much of a person as an adult human. I believe that the root cause of disagreement with this argument is not true concern for human life, but simply misogyny. The intense hypocrisy in most of the arguments presented by pro-lifers leave sexism as the main plausible factor. Many pro-lifers seem totally okay with the idea of people owning guns or even capital punishment, which obviously contradicts the idea that human life should be protected at all costs. Unless, of course, you argue, as I imagine these people would, that some deserve that violence done to them, whereas the fetus hasn't done anything wrong. Or has it? Shall we talk about some simple realities of pregnancy? The fetus causes huge and sometimes irreversible changes to a person's body, severely impacts their mobility and their ability to do anything, including, their job, gives them nausea, vomiting, headaches, and all-round body pain, culminating in an exit process, which is not just near incomprehensibly painful if it goes well, but can literally kill you if it doesn't. And that's not to mention the potential for psychological trauma. As a matter of fact, pregnancy is such an innately violent process that some people get PTSD simply from watching their partners give birth. Now, I'm not pro-death penalty myself, partially because there's always a margin of error as to knowing for sure whether the convicted person did commit the crime. Whereas with a fetus, you know exactly what hell is about to unfold. Obviously, the fetus doesn't mean any harm. I mean, it can't even throw up on you yet. But I've spoken about intentions before, and here, given that a lack of them is also due to a lack of the capacity to think, they're especially irrelevant. Assuming that you wouldn't let a regular human get away with inflicting that amount of harm on someone without their consent, and bearing in mind that many pro-lifers are also pro-death penalty, why is such extreme violence permissible if it's being exacted by something I could have pulled out of an alien egg capsule at primary school? Philosophy Tube makes the point about fetuses getting aborted all over the shore both by fertility clinics and natural human body function. To this, I would add that the contraceptive pill itself can also result in terminated fetuses. Your standard contraceptive pill works on more than one level. The first is simply to prevent ovulation. However, if that fails, a secondary measure comes into play. The womb lining is thinned, making it difficult for a fertilized egg to attach to it. In other words, a perfectly viable embryo may still come into existence and end up flushed down the toilet. So really, pro-lifers shouldn't be okay with contraceptive pills, fertility clinics, or just the way that the AFAB body works. I mean, I'm definitely not. I can think of a lot of improvements. We should definitely ban periods. When you get to the crux of these arguments, they all fall through in terms of simply suggesting that life should be protected at all costs. It is incredibly specific to abortion. And given that abortion has historically and is typically viewed as a female issue, it can therefore be concluded that the stance of pro-lifers is not truly one that is pro-life, but rather pro-patriarchy. And this brings us on to the difference between Oliver Thorn and Sophie Lewis. Ollie and Sophie present virtually identical arguments, but the response to them could not be more different. Now, to be fair, part of the reason that Ollie Thorn is a well-respected YouTube philosopher and Sophie Lewis is the literal spawn of Satan is because the people engaging with Ollie's video are primarily leftists who already support him, whereas the people engaging with Sophie's video are primarily right-wingers. But why is that? There are a few factors that make conservatives particularly allergic to Sophie's video in contrast to Ollie's. The first is that she's a theorist who writes books instead of a commentator-educator who does YouTube videos. Her video went viral after it was featured by Tucker Carlson on his segment of Fox News. In other words, it was shown to people who watch television, specifically people who watch Fox News. So, while her detractors may be using the internet, they may not be into the culture enough to have come across Ollie's video or to particularly care about it, whereas they perceive a physical book as a real-world threat. The fact that Sophie Lewis has a smaller online platform also just, makes her an easier target. It's a lot more fun to dogpile someone if they don't have a squad of adoring fans to fight on their behalf. I'm not speaking from personal experience at all. She also presents the argument in slightly different ways. She refers to pregnancy as work, calling it a labour relation, which obviously infuriates the right who view the mother-child relationship almost as sacred. She describes the unborn child as committing an act of violence, which is arguably true, but not particularly palatable language. I mean, you know how much the right hate violence. And then she goes on to make an analogy of workers striking? What are you, a communist? Don't strike! Accept your shitty conditions, do your job, and live under the dream that one day, if you work hard enough, you can be the one thriving on the exploitation of the working class. While the thought experiment presented by Ollie is specifically designed to win an opponent over, Sophie Lewis's video is extremely, possibly even deliberately antagonistic to traditionalist values. A Marxist analogy could only appeal to the left. However, and this is important, these are just differences in presentation. The fundamental argument is exactly the same. Furthermore, the exact scenario presented by Ollie Thorn, which is specifically designed to put an opponent in a position analogous to an unwanted pregnancy, and thereby win them over by appealing to their sense of empathy, was originally conceived by Judith Jarvis Thompson more than 30 years ago. There's one more difference between Ollie Thorn and all of these other thinkers left, and I think it's both the most significant and the most pertinent to the discussion. The fact that he's a man, and they're not. And I think this is relevant not just to pro-lifers, but to the entire abortion discussion. Now, I know what you're going to say. All these fans are already on board with this stuff, right? We're not misogynists, so if we only knew about this other person, we'd support her too, right? Well, if that's the case, then why have the viewpoints of the female thinkers presented in Ollie Thorn's video not already become the main arguments of pro-choicers? I mean, he obviously found them easily enough. Why is he even able to present these ideas as new? Why did my teacher treat me like I was a psychopath when I came up with this idea at age 14? Why have we not been supporting people with uteruses who have been making this argument from the start? We've established the argument that giving more weight to the state of personhood of the fetus than the bodily autonomy of the pregnant person is inherently misogynistic. So why did we ever use that logic, even to make an argument that is pro-choice? Part of it may have been a necessary evil, I guess. If we accept that the anti-abortion argument is patriarchal at its core, then you are more likely to win over an opponent with an argument that doesn't shake that fundamental pillar. In other words, you are more likely to win by saying the fetus is a jelly bean than saying women should have the right to decide what to do with their own bodies. Quick trans disclaimer, when I say women here, I'm referring specifically to the fact that abortion historically and is generally viewed as a female issue, and the resulting role of misogyny in people's position on the issue, rather than the result of abortion laws, which obviously affect all individuals capable of being pregnant, regardless of their gender. So we might win, but how solidly? This argument only works if the fetus is assumed not to be a person, which is not something there is a general consensus on at all, leaving us winning on ground that could crumble beneath us at any moment. Furthermore, it's not a win for the right to bodily autonomy, which is, in most other situations, placed as unquestionable, even at the expense of the lives of other adult humans. While having the right to abortion is arguably better than not, regardless of how that happens, it's still using an argument that fundamentally devalues the autonomy of the pregnant person in order to do so. What I'm saying here is that misogyny has been a key subconscious influence, not just in the views of pro-lifers, but in those of pro-choicers supporting the state of personhood of the fetus arguments over the right to bodily autonomy, regardless of whether that has been tactical choice or genuine belief. Bear in mind, I'm talking about a largely subconscious mindset that affects all of us, including me and people like me. We may be working to change a patriarchal society, but we were still born and raised in it, and that's going to affect the way we think. Altering that is a continuous, active, conscious process. Illegalizing abortion is one of the key ways in which women can be stripped of autonomy. So when discussing it, I think it's particularly important that we check our internalized prejudices and how those might affect our line of thinking. The right to bodily autonomy over the state of personhood of the fetus shouldn't have been an argument that I came up with and had to try and convince my teacher to understand. It should have been what he was teaching me. It should have been leading the discussion long before Oliver Thorn came along to grant it validity. Again, to be clear, I don't resent that video. If anything, I'm very glad he's done it. Now, I don't have to worry so much about being seen as crazy and delusional or cold and emotionless, whatever non-men are viewed as these days. Because here I am, agreeing with a clever man. What I would like you to take away from this video, besides obviously my opinion on abortion in general, is an awareness of your own prejudices and how those might affect how you perceive an argument, regardless of that argument's actual content. Remember, the situation presented by Ollie Thorn, while extremely satisfying to one's inner sadist, is unlikely to actually happen to anybody. Unwanted pregnancy, on the other hand, is a horrific everyday reality. The rights of those individuals to decide what to do in that situation is of utmost importance, and I think we have something to learn from the fact that these arguments weren't normalised when they were first made by women a long time ago. If you liked this video, please like, subscribe and share it. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.